The creditor's notice was nailed to the gate before dawn, where every tenant child on the lane would have seen it by breakfast. Elinor Wycliffe found it while the mist still lay low over the fields and the house windows remained dark behind her. The paper snapped in the cold breeze. Seizure of the southern storehouse in 14 days. Inventory of goods to follow. She read the lines once, then again, although the meaning had not changed. Her fingers tightened around the edge. For one dangerous moment, she wanted to tear it into pieces and scatter them into the ditch. Instead, she pulled the nail free, folded the notice carefully, and carried it inside. Her father was already awake. Matthew Wycliffe sat near the drawing-room fire with his silver hair uncombed and one hand resting on the head of his cane. He looked at the paper before he looked at her face. "They came early," he said. "They wanted the village to know." Elinor handed him the notice. "Then they have failed, at least for this morning." Matthew unfolded it slowly. The firelight caught the tremor in his fingers. 14 days. The southern storehouse is worth more than the debt. That is why they want it. He looked toward the window, beyond which the roof of the old building showed above the orchard wall. It controls the shortest road to the lower market. Elinor sat opposite him. "Can we appeal? With what money? Can we sell the carriage? We sold the better one last winter." His smile carried no humor, and the remaining mare would not clear the interest. Silence settled between them. Elinor thought of her mother, who had once accepted money from a prosperous cousin after a fever emptied the household accounts. The cousin had repeated the favor for 11 years, at dinners, in letters. Once, at her mother's own table, while Elinor stood beside the tea tray and watched gratitude become a chain. Her mother had smiled every time. She had never forgotten. "I will not be used to settle it," Elinor said. Matthew's head lifted sharply. "Who has suggested such a thing?" "No one yet." "Then do not borrow trouble. I know how these matters are spoken of. A gentleman in debt, an unmarried daughter, a house with useful land." Matthew folded the notice along its original crease. "If any man comes here believing your consent is part of the estate, he will leave disappointed." The firmness in his voice steadied her more than comfort would have done. "Even if the house goes?" "Especially then." Before Elinor could answer, wheels sounded beyond the gate. They were too heavy for a visitor's carriage. A wagon rolled into the yard, followed by another, both marked with the red stag of Redbourne. The first driver pulled the team to a halt beneath the kitchen windows and stared at the house as if it had appeared in the wrong county. Mrs. Harris rushed into the drawing-room without waiting to be announced. "Miss Elinor, there's grain outside, Redbourne grain." 2 full wagons. Matthew looked at Elinor. "Did you request it?" "No." She was already on her feet. In the yard, the driver climbed down and removed his cap. "Beg pardon, miss. We were told Wycliffe Storehouse." "By whom?" "The loading clerk at Redbourne." He glanced toward the old southern building, said the parish allotment was to be held here. Elinor looked at the wagon beds. 20 sacks, perhaps more. Enough flour for families who had been stretching oat broth through the week. "The parish allotment was meant for the lower market," she said. "That's what I thought." The driver's unease deepened. "But the docket says Wycliffe." Before she could examine it, women appeared at the open gate. Mrs. Bell came first with a wooden bowl under one arm and her youngest child holding her skirt. 2 more followed, then an old laborer from the West Cottages. Word traveled quickly when food was involved. "Is it true?" Mrs. Bell asked. They said grain had come. The child stared at the sacks. Elinor knew the Wycliffe kitchen held less than one full bin of flour. She also knew the red-born grain was not hers to distribute. Hunger did not make ownership disappear. It did, however, make delay a cruelty. "Mrs. Harris," she said, "bring our household flour." The cook froze. All of it, enough for today's bread. Matthew had come to the doorway behind her. He looked at the waiting bowls, then nodded once. No speech, no performance. Mrs. Harris hurried inside. Elinor took up the kitchen measure and began dividing flour, while the wagon driver stood uncertainly beside the horses. Each bowl received the same amount. No family received less because another had louder sorrow. Mrs. Bell's child watched the white flour fall as though it was something precious. "Will there be more tomorrow?" Mrs. Bell asked. Elinor met her eyes. "I do not know. It would have been kinder to promise. It would also have been false. Then, we'll make this last." As the final bowl was filled, a dry whisper came from the nearest wagon. One of the sacks had rubbed against a splintered board. Grain trickled through a small tear near the lower seam. Elinor set down the measure and climbed onto the wheel step. The official top cord was thick, pale, and intact. The side seam was different. Narrow blue thread ran through it in tight, deliberate stitches. Every other sack had been closed with unbleached cord. She touched the blue seam. It shifted beneath her glove more easily than it should have. "Mrs. Harris, my work basket." The cook brought it from the kitchen. Elinor took out her mother's plain silver thimble, fitted it over her finger, and stitched the small tear closed. The metal was worn smooth on one side from years of use. It had repaired cuffs, linens, children's stockings, and one wedding veil. Now it closed a grain sack that did not belong where it stood. Hoofbeats struck the lane. A rider entered the yard at speed, followed by a steward and 2 mounted servants. The first man dismounted before his horse had fully settled. He was tall, broad-shouldered beneath a dark riding coat, and carried the cold scent of rain, leather, and open fields with him. The driver bowed at once. "Your Grace." Frederick Ashcombe, Duke of Redbourne, looked from the wagons to the villagers leaving with flour, then to Elinor standing beside the blue-seamed sack. His gaze missed nothing. "Who authorized this delivery?" he asked. The driver swallowed. "The loading clerk, Your Grace. You did not question the route." "I did, sir. The docket," said Wycliffe Storehouse. Frederick's expression sharpened. "And you obeyed a paper that contradicted the parish order." Elinor stepped down from the wagon. "He also brought the grain where the paper directed. Before you condemn him, perhaps you should ask who wrote it." Frederick turned toward her. His eyes were grey and steady, but surprise flickered in them. Most people did not interrupt dukes in their own livery yard. "And you are Elinor Wycliffe. You opened the wagons?" "No. Yet grain has been distributed." "Our flour was distributed." She pointed toward the kitchen doorway where the emptied household bin stood visible. "Your grain remains sealed." His gaze moved to the bowls, disappearing beyond the gate, then back to the bin. "You gave away your own supply." "People were waiting. That does not explain why my wagons are here." "No. The docket may." She held out her hand to the driver. He gave her the folded sheet. Frederick approached, but he did not take it from her. He waited until she offered it. That small restraint registered. So did the speed with which he read. "The handwriting is not my steward's," he said. His own steward stepped forward and confirmed it. Frederick questioned the driver again, this time without accusation. Which clerk had handed over the paper? At what hour? Who had loaded the blue-seamed sack? Had any wagon stopped between Redbourne and Wycliffe? The driver answered more steadily once he understood that truth, not blame, was being demanded. Frederick ordered the parish grain taken to the lower market at once. Then he looked at the empty bowls, the open kitchen door, and the last dusting of flour on Elinor's sleeve. "Send half the first wagon back here," he told the steward. "Plain carts tomorrow, no crest, no announcement." Elinor studied him. Why no crest? Because hunger should not become advertisement. It was the right answer. She still heard the command inside it. "And the driver?" she asked. Frederick glanced toward the man. "He remains employed. He will help identify the clerk." The driver's shoulders lowered. Frederick turned back to Elinor. "May I inspect the storehouse?" "Not I shall." "May I?" Elinor noticed the difference. "You may." They crossed the yard together. At the storehouse door, Frederick saw the folded creditor's notice in Matthew's hand. His gaze settled on the name of the property, then on the road beyond the wall. Whoever sent those wagons knew this building would soon change hands, he said. Elinor looked at the blue thread caught against her glove. Then perhaps the mistake was not a mistake. Frederick's attention sharpened. Behind them, the Redbourne wagon began to turn toward the market. Ahead, the southern storehouse stood locked, threatened, and suddenly far more valuable than debt alone could explain. 2 mornings later, Frederick Ashcombe returned to Wycliffe Grange with a steward, a solicitor, and a leather case that looked far more dangerous than any creditor's notice. Elinor saw the carriage from the drawing-room window and knew at once that he had not come merely to inspect the storehouse. Men did not bring solicitors when they intended only to ask questions. Matthew rose carefully from his chair before Mrs. Harris announced them. His cane struck the floor once. "He has prepared something." "Yes." Elinor looked at the leather case in the solicitor's hands. "The question is whether he has prepared for us to disagree." Frederick entered with the same restrained authority he had carried into the yard, though today there was no rain on his coat and no urgency to excuse bluntness. He bowed first to Matthew, then to Elinor. "Mr. Wycliffe, Miss Wycliffe, Your Grace," Matthew said, "you have brought half a chancery office into my drawing-room." The solicitor lowered his eyes. Frederick did not smile. "I have brought an answer to the pressure on your estate." "That was quickly found." "The pressure itself is not new." Frederick waited until Matthew invited him to sit. The steward remained near the door. The solicitor placed the leather case on a small table and opened it, revealing several folded documents tied with blue ribbon. Elinor's attention caught on the color before she could stop herself. The ribbon was a darker blue than the thread from the grain sack, smooth and expensive. Yet the resemblance sharpened her unease. Frederick noticed where she was looking. "These papers concern the debt, not the grain inquiry." "You have already separated the two," she asked. "I am trying to." "Then begin with the grain." Frederick inclined his head. The southern storehouse stands on the shortest carriage road between Redbourne's western farms and the lower market. Whoever controls it can hold grain under cover, divide loads, alter dockets, or delay delivery without using the main abbey yard. Matthew's fingers tightened around his cane. "And the creditor?" "A London lending house, whose local interests are represented by a company connected to Sir Osbert Calthorpe." Elinor looked at her father. "So the debt is being used to gain the route." "That is my conclusion," Frederick said. "Not yet my proof." "And your answer?" Matthew asked. Frederick turned toward the solicitor. One document was lifted from the case and placed before him. A marriage settlement. The room became very still. Elinor heard the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel and the scrape of a branch against the outside wall. Nothing else moved. Matthew did not reach for the paper. You have known my daughter for 2 days. I know enough to respect her judgment. Respect is not marriage. No, but it is a better beginning than many marriages receive. Elinor met Frederick's gaze. Did you come here to propose to me or to acquire the storehouse? The question struck cleanly. The solicitor looked down. Frederick did not. Both matters are connected. They are connected because you chose to connect them. They are connected because your family is under pressure. And Redbourne requires a secure route. That sounds like an explanation of convenience. It is also an explanation of protection. He opened the document himself. The settlement clears every Wycliffe debt. Your father retains a life interest in the house and income sufficient to maintain it. You receive a jointure independent of my personal favour. The southern storehouse remains attached to Wycliffe land, but may be used for Redbourne grain under fixed terms. Elinor listened without interrupting. Each provision was careful. Each provision had been designed to prevent the common cruelties of marriage. She would have money of her own. Matthew would not be displaced. The house would survive. The creditor would lose the root. Hungry families would have a protected grain station. It was an excellent arrangement. That was precisely why it frightened her. You prepared all of this before asking whether I wished to marry you, she said. Frederick's expression shifted by the smallest degree. I prepared terms before presenting the question. You prepared my security before learning whether I wanted your hand. Would you prefer I arrive with sentiment and no protection? I would prefer you recognize that protection does not create consent. Matthew held out one hand. Let me read it. The solicitor passed him the settlement. Matthew examined every page slowly. Frederick waited, but impatience gathered in the set of his shoulders. Elinor saw that he believed the paper would make refusal irrational. He had accounted for money, property, widowhood, servants, residence, and inheritance. He had accounted for everything except freedom. Matthew reached the final page and laid the document flat upon his knee. This is generous. Frederick's gaze sharpened. It is intended to be just. That is a better word. Matthew looked toward Elinor, then back to Frederick. You have provided for my daughter if you die. You have provided for me if the debt is called. You have provided for your grain if the road is threatened. You have not provided for the possibility that she may not choose you. Frederick's voice remained even. That is why I am asking now. No, you are asking after constructing an answer that makes refusal appear irresponsible. The words landed harder because Matthew spoke without anger. Your Grace, my daughter needs a good man, not a rich one. The solicitor went still. Frederick's face changed at last. Not rage. Wounded pride. You believe wealth prevents goodness? No, I believe wealth can prevent a man from discovering whether he possesses it. Matthew leaned forward on his cane. You have solved every difficulty with power. Money clears debt. Rank stops seizure. Marriage secures land. But goodness is tested when another person says no, and you cannot command the cost away. Frederick looked at Elinor. Is that your answer? She felt the weight of the house around her. The faded curtains, the cracked molding above the door, the roof that needed repair before winter. She thought of the storehouse, the creditor, the empty flour bin, and the security written in black ink only a few feet away. For one aching moment, she wanted to say yes, simply because she was tired of being brave. That desire shamed her until she understood it should not. Wanting safety was not weakness. surrendering choice because fear made safety irresistible would be. "My father has spoken for himself," she said. "I will speak for myself." Frederick waited. "I do not doubt that your terms are generous. I do not even doubt that you mean to protect us." She folded her hands to keep them steady, but desperation cannot be permitted to masquerade as consent. His gaze did not leave hers. "You think I would hold your family's danger over you? You have already placed the cure beside the proposal. Because the cure is real, so is the pressure." Frederick rose and crossed to the window. Beyond the glass, the southern storehouse stood beneath a pale sky. "If I withdraw the settlement, the creditor may proceed. Then let that risk belong honestly to us." "You would lose the house to preserve a distinction." Elinor stood. "The distinction is whether my life remains mine." He turned. The restraint in his face had become effort. "You speak as though I offered purchase. You offered marriage, land security, debt relief, and access rights in one package. You may not have intended purchase. That does not make the arrangement feel free." Silence held them. Frederick looked toward Matthew, perhaps expecting the older man to soften the refusal. Matthew did not. At last, Frederick returned to the table. He retied the document without asking the solicitor to do it. Very well. Elinor had prepared herself for persuasion, coldness, perhaps even threat. His acceptance unsettled her more. "The settlement is withdrawn," he said. "The grain inquiry will continue. I will not interfere with Wycliffe debt enforcement through any condition attached to marriage." Matthew studied him. "That is not the same as saying you will not interfere at all. No, if fraud is connected to the debt, I will act against the fraud." Frederick faced Elinor. "May I return without papers?" The question was quieter than anything he had said that morning. "For what purpose?" "To prove that my character is not confined to a settlement. You cannot prove goodness as though it were a title deed. Then I will let conduct answer over time." Elinor saw the difficulty of the words for him. He was accustomed to decisions that became reality the moment he made them. Now he was asking permission to enter a process he could not control. "You may call properly," she said. "You may not assume that my answer will change. I will not. You may not pay our debt in secret." Agreed. "You may not tell society there is an understanding." Agreed. Matthew looked at him. "And if she refuses you after you have done everything well?" Frederick's eyes returned to Elinor. "Then the grain must still reach the market. The creditor must still answer for any fraud, and Miss Wycliffe must remain free." The answer was not proof, not yet, but it was the first thing he had offered that did not ask for something in return. Frederick bowed and left with the solicitor the unused settlement and the fortune that had failed to purchase certainty. Outside, before entering his carriage, he turned to his steward. Elinor heard his voice through the open window. "No action is to be taken against Wycliffe property in Redbourne's name. Investigate Sir Osbert's connection to the lending house." Quietly. The steward asked something too low to catch. Frederick answered with unmistakable clarity. "No, do not settle the debt." She said no. Then the carriage rolled away, leaving the southern storehouse still threatened. The proposal refused, and Elinor more troubled by the Duke's obedience than she had been by his offer. Frederick's calling card arrived the following afternoon without flowers, gifts, or any note beyond a request to accompany the Wycliffes to the parish bread committee 3 days later. Elinor read the card twice, then placed it beside the mantel clock. "He has remembered the first condition," Matthew said from his chair. "A card is not a victory. No, but neither is it a settlement. Elinor looked toward the window. Beyond the orchard wall, the southern storehouse stood under watch now, not guarded by Redbourne men, which would have looked like possession, but inspected twice daily by the rector's clerk and one tenant chosen by Matthew. Frederick had arranged the system after asking permission. That small fact disturbed her more than it reassured her. It was easier to resist a man who ignored her, harder to judge one who listened. On the morning of the committee meeting, Frederick arrived in a plain, dark carriage with no outriders. He stepped down before the groom could open the door fully and waited in the hall until Matthew joined them. "Your Grace," Elinor said. "Miss Wycliffe." His gaze moved briefly to the closed drawing-room door where the withdrawn settlement had once lain on the table. "I came as requested, without papers, and without a public announcement. No one at Redbourne has been told there is an understanding, because there is not one. I remember." Matthew adjusted his gloves. "My daughter has additional conditions." Frederick looked at Elinor. "I expected as much. No secret payment of our debt," she said. "No charitable display attached to my name. No suggestion that my presence at the committee means I have accepted your proposal." "Agreed. You answer quickly." Would delay improve the answer? Sometimes delay reveals whether a man has considered the cost. Frederick held her gaze. "Then let me be precise. I will not pay the debt. I will not use relief as courtship. I will not claim your consent. I will continue the grain inquiry, whether you ever accept me or not." Matthew watched him closely. Better. They travelled together to the vestry room beside the parish church. The road was still damp from overnight rain, and the wheels struck shallow ruts with a steady rhythm. Matthew sat opposite Frederick. Elinor sat beside her father, though the carriage was wide enough for greater ease. For several minutes, no one spoke. Frederick broke the silence. "You asked whether I had considered the cost of acting quickly." Elinor turned toward him. "Have you? Not often enough." He looked through the window toward the fields. "My father trusted stewards who concealed shortages, neglected repairs, and delayed unpleasant reports. By the time he learned the truth, tenants had gone through a winter with roofs that leaked and grain stores that existed only in ledgers." Matthew's expression changed slightly. "You were young, old enough to understand that hesitation had consequences." Frederick folded his gloves once between his hands. "I learned the wrong lesson from it. I began to believe that deciding quickly was the same as deciding well." Elinor heard no appeal for sympathy in his voice that made the confession feel less practiced. "And now?" she asked. "Now I am attempting to learn that delay can be cowardice, but command can be blindness. Attempting is not the same as learning." "No." His answer came without defensiveness. "That is why I have asked for time." The vestry room was already crowded when they arrived. The rector stood near the long table, with parish account books open before him. Sir Osbert Calthorpe occupied the chair nearest the fire. One polished boot extended toward the grate. He rose when Frederick entered, then looked at Elinor with the faint surprise of a man who considered her presence improper but lacked the courage to say so before a duke. "Your Grace, Mr. Wycliffe, Miss Wycliffe." "Sir Osbert," Frederick said. The rector invited them to sit. A baker, 2 landowners, the market-keeper, and 3 parish women filled the remaining places. Mrs. Bell stood near the wall with her youngest child asleep against her shoulder. Elinor noticed the empty bowl beneath her chair. Sir Osbert opened the meeting. Given the irregular arrival of grain and the pressure upon existing stores, I recommend a temporary reduction in loaf size. Order must be preserved until the supply route is clarified. How much smaller? Elinor asked. Sir Osbert glanced at the rector as if hoping someone else would correct her. 2 ounces per household loaf. For how long? Until conditions improve. That is not a duration. His mouth tightened. A fortnight, perhaps. Elinor looked toward Mrs. Bell. Mrs. Bell has 4 children. Mrs. Pritchard has 3 people in her cottage. The West cottages have 6 labourers sharing 2 ovens. 2 ounces removed from every loaf does not sound like much in this room. Over 14 days, it becomes several meals. Miss Wycliffe, Sir Osbert said, sentiment cannot replace arithmetic. Then, let us use arithmetic. Elinor opened the cloth bag she had brought and placed 3 parish loaves on the table. These were issued yesterday and recorded at £2 each. The market keeper brought the scale forward. The first loaf weighed nearly 4 ounces less than the ledger stated. The second was 5 ounces short. The third was closer, but still underweight. A murmur moved through the room. Sir Osbert leaned back. The baker may have made an error. The baker flushed. I weighed them with the parish set. Then weigh the standard, Elinor said. The market keeper placed the £1 brass weight on the scale. The rector produced a sealed standard from the church chest and set it opposite. The beam dropped at once. The parish weight was too light. The market keeper stared at it. That cannot be. It can, Frederick said. The question is how. The smith was sent for from across the square. While they waited, Sir Osbert argued that constant handling might have damaged the weight. Elinor said nothing. She watched Frederick. He did not seize the argument or pronounce guilt. He asked who had custody of the weights when they were last certified and who supplied the replacement set after the old one cracked. The answer led back to a contractor working through Sir Osbert's market office. When the smith arrived, he tapped the brass, listened, then loosened the base with a narrow tool. The bottom plate came away. Inside was a hollow space where metal had been removed. Beneath the rim lay a small twist of blue lint. Elinor's pulse quickened. She took the thread sample from her reticule, the one saved from the misdirected sack. The colours matched closely enough to silence even Sir Osbert. Coincidence, he said at last. Perhaps, Elinor replied, but not one we should ignore. Frederick looked at her rather than the thread. What would you do next? The room turned toward him. Elinor understood the significance. He had not asked his steward, the rector, or Sir Osbert. He had asked her. Inspect the sacks and the roots quietly, she said. If someone is altering grain or weights, a public accusation will only warn them. Mark the next delivery. Weigh it at departure and arrival. Record who touches it. Frederick nodded. Agreed. He did not repeat her plan as though it had become his. Sir Osbert's jaw tightened. Before the meeting could continue, the door opened and Lady Millicent Greystone entered in a dark travelling cloak, followed by a maid. She was Frederick's maternal cousin and had managed Redbourne's charitable subscriptions since the death of the late Duchess. Her expression was composed, but her gaze moved first to Elinor. Frederick, she said, I was told you had brought Miss Wycliffe into the committee. Miss Wycliffe brought evidence, he replied. Lady Millicent looked at the hollow weight, and now every village complaint will expect a ducal investigation. Only those supported by fact. That is not how expectation works. She removed her gloves slowly. Once people believe a duke must explain every decision, authority becomes apology. Elinor felt the insult beneath the abstraction. Frederick did too. If authority cannot survive a question about missing bread, he said. "It deserves to be questioned." Lady Millicent's eyes cooled. Then she turned to Elinor. "You have taught him that quickly." "No," Elinor said. "I asked him to look." Frederick's attention rested on her for one brief moment, quiet and unreadable. Then the rector lifted the hollow weight from the table. Blue lint clung to its rim. Outside, the market bell struck noon, somewhere between Redbourne's farms and the parish ovens. Someone had learned how to make a full measure look honest, while hungry families carried less away. Lady Millicent's invitation arrived the next morning on thick cream paper, requesting the pleasure of Mr. Wycliffe and Miss Wycliffe at luncheon at Redbourne Abbey. Elinor read the note once and understood the challenge beneath the courtesy. Matthew understood it too. "She wishes to examine you," he said. "No, she wishes others to examine me while she watches." "Will you go?" Elinor folded the note. Yes, Redbourne Abbey received them beneath a sky the colour of pewter. The entrance hall smelled faintly of beeswax, coal smoke, and lilies, arranged in tall porcelain vases. Footmen moved with the precise silence of men trained to make wealth appear effortless. Elinor entered beside Matthew without hurrying. She wore her best grey gown, carefully altered at the sleeves, with her mother's silver thimble resting inside her reticule. Frederick met them before Lady Millicent could send a servant. "Mr. Wycliffe, Miss Wycliffe." "Your Grace," Matthew said. Frederick looked at Elinor. "Thank you for coming. Your cousin made refusal sound socially hazardous." His mouth almost curved. "That was likely intentional." "Then we agree on something already." Lady Millicent appeared at the drawing-room doors in pearl silk, elegant and composed. "Elinor, how kind of you to come." The use of her first name was too familiar to be warm. "Lady Millicent. You must sit beside Lady Harbury at luncheon. She has such an interest in unusual engagements." Elinor glanced at Frederick. He had heard the trap, but he did not move to prevent it. Instead, he asked quietly, "Would you prefer another place?" The question mattered. "No," Elinor said. "Let Lady Harbury satisfy her interest." The luncheon table held 12 guests, including Sir Osbert Calthorpe, the rector, 2 neighbouring landowners, and Lady Harbury, a widow with sharp eyes and a voice polished by years of pronouncing judgment as concern. Elinor was placed midway down the table, far enough from Frederick to deny easy rescue and close enough to Lady Millicent for every answer to be observed. The first courses passed without open attack. Then Lady Harbury laid down her fork. "Miss Wycliffe, one hears the most extraordinary things in the country. The country becomes extraordinary when it is bored." Lady Harbury smiled. "One hears that you refused an offer from the Duke of Redbourne while your father's estate stands under pressure." The table quieted. Matthew's hand tightened around the stem of his glass. Elinor met the widow's gaze. "One hears very brave." The word carried the faint contempt reserved for decisions others considered foolish, or perhaps very proud. Lady Millicent spoke before Elinor could answer. "Pride often wears the face of principle when gratitude is difficult." Frederick's attention shifted toward his cousin. Elinor felt the old memory rise before she could stop it. Her mother at the tea table. A prosperous relative reminding everyone who had paid the fever physician. Her mother smiling while shame entered the room and sat down among them. "Gratitude is not difficult," Elinor said. "It becomes difficult only when another person insists upon measuring it." Lady Harbury raised her brows. Surely generosity deserves acknowledgement. Freely offered generosity, yes. Elinor kept her voice even. But if a gift is presented with an expected surrender attached, it is no longer only a gift. Lady Millicent lifted her wine-glass. Your mother understood family generosity. Did she not? The cruelty was quiet enough to require explanation, which made it worse. I recall she received substantial assistance during an illness. Elinor felt Matthew move beside the table. Frederick spoke first. Millicent. One word, a warning. Elinor turned toward him. No, let her finish. Lady Millicent's expression did not change. I merely meant that dependence need not be humiliating unless one chooses to make it so. Elinor looked at her across the silver and crystal. My mother did not make it humiliating. The person who repeated the favor for 11 years did. No one moved. Lady Harbury lowered her eyes. Sir Osbert studied his plate. Frederick did not interrupt or soften the moment. He let Elinor keep it. My mother was grateful, she continued. She was also made to understand that gratitude had no ending. I will not confuse rescue with ownership because society finds the distinction inconvenient. Matthew's shoulders eased. Across the table, Frederick's gaze held hers with something deeper than admiration. Recognition, perhaps. Lady Millicent set down her glass. You speak strongly for a woman whose household is accepting parish flour. We distributed our own flour before Redbourne grain arrived, and now the Duke sends wagons to the parish. Elinor glanced towards Sir Osbert, unless someone has altered the route again. The conversation shifted exactly as Frederick intended when he addressed the rector. You brought the questioned dockets. Yes, Your Grace. The rector produced 2 folded papers from his case after the servants cleared the first course. One recorded a delivery to the lower market. The other recorded the same wagon as received at Wycliffe storehouse. Both bore the initials M.W. Matthew took the second docket and examined it closely. These are not mine. Sir Osbert leaned forward. Initials are easily denied. Frederick's voice cooled. So are insinuations when evidence is absent. I only mean that Wycliffe Grange had both motive and opportunity to receive unrecorded grain. Elinor looked at the signature. The strokes were careful, almost too careful. Her father wrote quickly, with the final line of the W slanting upward. Here the letters had been copied from somewhere formal. This was not written from memory, she said. It was copied. Sir Osbert gave a faint smile. You are an expert in handwriting now. No, I am familiar with my father's hand. She turned the page toward Frederick. Whoever wrote this copied the initials from an account margin or signed receipt. They imitated shape, not motion. Matthew nodded. She is correct. The rector placed a genuine parish acknowledgement beside the docket. The difference was visible once seen. Frederick examined both. Who submitted the false copy? A carrier attached to Sir Osbert's contractor, the rector said. Sir Osbert's face hardened. My contractor handles dozens of deliveries. A carrier's error proves nothing. Then the carrier should be found, Frederick said. He left the district yesterday, Sir Osbert replied too quickly. The answer drew every eye. Convenient, Matthew said. Lady Millicent intervened. This table was not intended to become an inquiry. It became one when forged initials were placed before us, Frederick said. Elinor reached for the genuine receipt. Her reticule caught against the chair, and the silver thimble slipped free. It struck the carpet near Frederick's shoe. He bent and picked it up. For one suspended moment, she expected him to cross the space and place it in her palm. Instead, he remained where he was and waited. Elinor extended her hand. Only then did he return it. His fingers did not touch hers. The restraint was almost more intimate than contact would have been. Your mother's? He asked quietly. Yes. You repaired the blue-seamed sack with it. I did. Then keep it close. Before Elinor could answer, the dining room doors opened. A footman crossed to Frederick and whispered something at his shoulder. Frederick rose at once. Speak plainly, the footman swallowed. 2 Redbourne grain wagons are missing, Your Grace. They left the western farms before dawn and never reached the lower road checkpoint. Sir Osbert pushed back his chair. Road delays happen? Both wagons? Frederick asked. On the same morning? The rector looked toward the forged docket. Matthew looked toward Elinor. Lady Millicent did not look at the footman, the rector, or Sir Osbert. She looked only at Elinor, as if measuring whether the humiliation had weakened her. Elinor closed her hand around the thimble. The wrong wagon was not an isolated mistake, she said. Frederick's expression settled into cold purpose. No. He looked toward Sir Osbert. And whoever is moving the grain now knows we have begun to count it. The parish storehouse smelled of dust, damp wood, and grain that should have been there, but was not. Frederick unlocked the outer door shortly after noon, with Elinor, Matthew, the rector, and the Redbourne steward standing behind him. Sir Osbert arrived before anyone could begin, claiming that no inspection involving his contractors should proceed without him. Frederick allowed his presence on the condition that he touch nothing. You make me sound accused, Sir Osbert said. You are present because the missing wagons passed through a system you oversee, Frederick replied. That is not an accusation, yet. The bins along the eastern wall were nearly empty. According to the ledger, they should have held more than 300 pounds of wheat. Instead, only a thin layer remained at the bottom, mixed with darker husks. Elinor knelt and rubbed a pinch between her fingers. Barley sweepings, she said. The rector looked down at the open book. The last entry says 2 full deliveries were received 4 days ago. By whom? Frederick asked. The steward traced the line. A market clerk named Pike. Sir Osbert folded his arms. Pike works for a carrier, not for me. The carrier is paid through your office, Elinor said. Sir Osbert looked at her with controlled irritation. Miss Wycliffe, commercial arrangements are rarely so simple. Hunger is. Frederick moved toward the door. Seal every road leaving the district. Hold every grain cart until it is searched. Elinor rose at once. No. The word stopped him before the order left the room. Sir Osbert gave a thin smile. Frederick turned toward her. 2 wagons are missing. And if you stop every cart, honest deliveries stop with them. Tampered grain may leave the district. So may untampered grain fail to reach families. The steward looked between them. Frederick's jaw tightened. The old instinct had returned, swift and absolute. Elinor saw him recognize it. He drew a breath. What do you propose? Mark the next lawful delivery where it cannot be copied quickly. Weigh each sack before departure and again at arrival. Record every hand that touches it. Let the roads remain open. And if another wagon disappears, then we learn where, rather than teaching the guilty to wait until your roadblocks are removed. Silence held for a moment. Frederick looked toward the near-empty bins, then nodded. Do it. He turned to the steward. Use a double-loop knot beneath the top cord. Record departure and arrival weights in separate books. No single clerk keeps both. Sir Osbert's smile faded. Elinor moved to the nearest blue-seamed sack, one that had been set aside after the mistaken delivery. Its top cord remained unbroken. She fitted her mother's thimble over her finger and worked the point of a needle beneath the side stitching. You believe this seam is part of the method, Frederick said. I believe it deserves to be opened before we speculate further. She drew one inner loop free. The blue thread loosened in a narrow line. with a careful pull, the side seam opened enough for her hand to pass through, while the official top cord remained untouched. The rector stared. Then grain could be removed after weighing. And replaced with something cheaper, Elinor said, glancing at the barley sweepings. Sir Osbert stepped closer despite Frederick's warning. Any sack can be cut. This one was not cut, Elinor replied. It was designed to open without disturbing the seal. Designed is a strong word. So is missing. Frederick crouched beside the sack. He did not reach into the opening. How much could be taken? Several pounds without changing the sack's shape enough to attract notice. And the seam closed again? Yes, by someone who knows the stitch. He looked at the blue thread between her fingers, the same color found inside the hollow weight. Perhaps from the same supplier, perhaps from the same hands. Sir Osbert straightened, or perhaps from any shop that sells blue cord. Then the shops can be asked, Frederick said, quietly. A sound came from outside before Sir Osbert could answer. Not carriage wheels. A woman's voice, strained by haste. The door opened, and Mrs. Pritchard entered, carrying a flour sack against her chest. Her bonnet sat crooked, and her face was pale from the walk. She stopped when she saw Sir Osbert. Every line of her body changed. Elinor crossed to her. Mrs. Pritchard, what happened? The widow clutched the sack more tightly. I bought £10 yesterday. She glanced toward Sir Osbert, then toward the door. It wasn't 10 when I reached home. Sir Osbert gave an impatient sigh. Household measures are often inaccurate. Mrs. Pritchard flinched. Elinor held out both hands. May I see it? After a moment, the widow surrendered the sack. Blue thread ran along its side. The top cord was still sealed with a market stamp. Frederick's expression hardened, but he said nothing. The steward brought the parish scale. Elinor placed the sack upon it. The beam settled at a little more than £8. The rector checked the result using the sealed standard from the church chest. It did not change. Where did you buy it? Elinor asked. Mrs. Pritchard stared at the floor. The lower market. From which seller? I can't say. Sir Osbert's voice sharpened. If you bring an accusation into a formal inspection, you must name the man. The widow looked up then, fear plain in her face. My cottage stands on Calthorpe land. The room became still. And my boy works near the stables, she added. If I name anyone, and I'm wrong, we lose both. Matthew moved closer, leaning on his cane. You will not be required to accuse without protection. Mrs. Pritchard looked at Frederick. Can you promise that? Frederick answered at once. No one will remove you from your cottage while this matter is under inquiry. Elinor turned to him. A spoken promise may not survive a change of steward, creditor, or ownership. The words were not an attack. They were the truth Mrs. Pritchard had no rank to insist upon. Frederick understood. Then it will be written. He addressed the rector. Prepare an undertaking witnessed by you and the churchwardens. No alteration of her tenancy until the inquiry is concluded. Send a copy to Sir Osbert's solicitor. Sir Osbert's face tightened. You cannot interfere with lawful tenancy. I can require that no retaliation occur under cover of it. You presume guilt. I prevent pressure upon a witness. Mrs. Pritchard's shoulders lowered slightly, though fear did not leave her. Elinor touched the flour sack. You said the weight was wrong. Was anything else unusual? The widow hesitated. It tasted bitter. Mrs. Harris was not present, but the rector kept a small sifting screen for checking meal quality. Elinor opened only enough of the sack to remove a sample, preserving the seal and seam for later examination. Pale flour fell through the mesh. Coarser dark particles remained behind. along with a fine white powder that clung to the frame. Frederick looked toward the barley sweepings in the bin. Substitution. Possibly barley meal, Elinor said. She touched the white residue and rubbed it between finger and thumb. And something heavier. Chalk, Matthew said quietly. Sir Osbert laughed once, without amusement. A widow's bitter loaf, a few ounces of dust and a coloured thread. You are building conspiracy from kitchen complaints. Frederick stood. Repeat that. Sir Osbert looked at him. Repeat what you said. Before the rector, the market keeper when he arrives, and the 2 churchwardens who will sign Mrs. Pritchard's protection. Sir Osbert's mouth closed. Elinor watched Mrs. Pritchard absorb the silence. For the first time, the woman's fear shifted into something steadier. Not safety, the beginning of being believed. Frederick turned to the steward. Plain carts will carry replacement grain from Redbourne's private stores tonight. No crest, no speeches, every sack weighed before, departure and at arrival. Your Grace, Sir Osbert said, that will imply the parish supply has failed. It has failed. Public confidence. Hungry families cannot eat confidence. Elinor met Frederick's gaze. He had used almost the same logic she had given him earlier, but not as a performance, and not to claim her wisdom. He had changed the order because the cost had become visible, a small thing, perhaps. Yet trust was built from small things that survived pressure. As Mrs. Pritchard prepared to leave, Lady Millicent's carriage appeared beyond the storehouse door. She entered without haste, her expression composed despite the dust and open sacks. I have heard enough rumours to know silence is no longer serving Redbourne, she said. Her eyes moved to Mrs. Pritchard, the blue-seamed sack, and the sifted flour. The county requires reassurance. Frederick's face cooled. The county requires honest grain and visible order. Lady Millicent turned toward Matthew. I have arranged a subscription breakfast at the assembly room. A ceremonial purse will be presented to the Wycliffe bread room as a public declaration of confidence. Matthew's hand tightened around his cane. I have not agreed to receive it. Refusal would be misunderstood. Elinor saw the trap at once. If he accepted, society would say Frederick had purchased the family after all. If he refused, Lady Millicent would call it pride while families went hungry. When? Frederick asked. In 2 days, Lady Millicent smiled, before the next public distribution. Her gaze settled on Elinor. Everyone who matters will be watching. Lady Millicent had transformed the assembly room into a theatre of benevolence. White linen covered the long tables. Silver coffee urns gleamed beneath the windows. Donners from neighbouring estates stood in small, well-dressed groups, while parish families waited outside for the grain distribution, scheduled to follow. At the centre of the room, on a raised tray, rested a velvet purse, braided with gold cord. Elinor saw the purse before she saw Frederick. The cord had been tied too carefully, as though the knot itself were meant to declare order. Matthew stood beside her, with one hand on his cane. His face was pale, but his posture remained straight. You may still refuse to stand near it, Elinor said quietly. If I move away, Lady Millicent will say I feared the money. She will say what serves her, then let her work harder. Frederick crossed the room toward them before a servant could announce their arrival. He bowed to Matthew first, Mr. Wycliffe, then to Elinor, Miss Wycliffe. Your Grace, Matthew said. His gaze shifted toward the raised tray. I assume that is the generosity I am expected to admire. Frederick's expression tightened. You are expected to accept nothing. Has Lady Millicent been told? Yes. Did she agree? No. Elinor looked toward Lady Millicent, who stood beside Sir Osbert near the subscription ledger. "Then this breakfast is not about agreement." "No," Frederick said. "It is about witnesses." Lady Millicent approached with a composed smile. "How fortunate. Everyone is here." Her gaze rested briefly on Matthew's worn coat, then returned to his face. "The purse contains sovereigns subscribed by the county for the Wycliffe bread room." "I will not receive it," Matthew said. "Not while my household remains under suspicion." A few nearby conversations ceased. Lady Millicent lowered her voice, but not enough to prevent others from hearing. "The families outside may not understand why pride should interrupt relief." Matthew's grip tightened on his cane. "The grain is theirs. The accusation is mine. Do not confuse the two." Sir Osbert joined them. "Surely a practical arrangement can be found. The purse might be accepted into temporary custody." "Whose custody?" Elinor asked. "The parish committee's, perhaps." "Administered through the same market office, using hollow weights." Sir Osbert's mouth hardened. Frederick stepped between them, without blocking Elinor from view. "The purse will not be transferred to Mr. Wycliffe or his household." Lady Millicent turned toward him. "Frederick, the subscription was arranged to restore confidence." "Confidence cannot be forced into a man's hand. Nor can a county be governed by private sensitivities. This is not sensitivity. It is consent." The word carried. Several guests looked toward the raised purse as if it had changed shape. Lady Millicent's smile thinned. "Then perhaps Mr. Wycliffe will at least stand beside the tray while the amount is announced." "No," Matthew said. "I will not lend my face to a gift I have refused." The refusal landed more heavily than any outburst. A merchant near the windows looked away. One of the landowners whispered something to his wife. Lady Millicent's expression remained serene, but Elinor saw anger beneath it. Sir Osbert lifted the purse from the tray. "If no one wishes to accept it, I will place it under seal until the inquiry concludes." As his fingers closed around the cord, Elinor noticed a slight irregularity near the brass clasp. "Wait." Sir Osbert looked at her. "For what?" "The cord has been cut." Lady Millicent's eyes sharpened. Elinor stepped closer. The braid had been joined with a neat splice hidden beneath the tassel. "May I see it?" Sir Osbert hesitated. Frederick held out his hand. "Give it to her." Sir Osbert surrendered the purse to Frederick, who passed it to Elinor without touching the cord more than necessary. She turned it beneath the light. "This is not a household knot." Frederick leaned closer. "No." His voice changed. "It is a short splice. You recognize it from naval supply work. Damaged cord was joined this way when stores had to remain under seal." Sir Osbert gave a dismissive laugh. "Many warehousemen know such work." "Perhaps," Frederick said, "but Lady Millicent's secretary does not." Lady Millicent folded her hands. "The purse was counted this morning before 2 witnesses. Naturally, the cord was handled." "Handled is not cut," Elinor said. "Who opened it?" "My secretary and I." "And who retied it?" Lady Millicent paused only a fraction too long. "A footman." Elinor looked at the splice again. "A footman trained in naval stores? You are assigning drama to string." "Cord," Frederick said, "and no accusation will be made until we know more." Elinor glanced at him. He wanted to confront someone. She saw it in the stillness of his shoulders, yet he waited. "Secure the purse," she said, "with independent custody." The rector stepped forward from the far end of the room. Frederick pointed toward a tall mahogany cabinet against the east wall. "That cabinet has 2 locks. The rector will hold one key. My steward will hold the other." Lady Millicent looked toward the cabinet. It belonged to the old subscription office. "You know it?" Elinor asked. I managed charitable accounts there after the late Duchess died." Her tone suggested the matter was beneath suspicion. A ring of household keys hung from the silver chatelaine at her waist. Elinor noticed them, then looked away before Lady Millicent could follow her attention. The purse was placed inside the cabinet before 4 witnesses. The rector turned one key, the steward turned the second. Frederick tested both doors himself. No one opens it without both men present. Sir Osbert stepped back, an unnecessary spectacle. "Then it should cause no inconvenience," Frederick said. The breakfast continued, though no one forgot the locked cabinet. Donations were announced. Coffee cooled in untouched cups. Lady Millicent spoke of duty and order, while servants carried pastries past windows overlooking families waiting below. Near the end, she announced that the next grain distribution would be held publicly in the lower hall in 2 days. "Every sack will be weighed before witnesses," she said. "The Wycliffe bread room will receive the first allotment, so that no doubt remains regarding our confidence in Mr. Wycliffe." Matthew's face hardened. Elinor understood the second trap at once. Any irregularity in the first sack would attach itself to their name before the county. Frederick approached Lady Millicent as the polite applause ended. "You should have consulted me. Would you have agreed? Not without safeguards. Then consultation would only have delayed reassurance. You do not command Redbourne stores." "No," she said softly. "I protect Redbourne's reputation." Her gaze moved to Elinor. "Someone must." Frederick's expression cooled, but Elinor touched his sleeve before he answered. The contact lasted less than a second. It stopped him. "Not here," she said. He looked down at the place where her hand had rested, then back at his cousin. "The distribution will proceed under my steward. No sack enters the hall unweighed. No one alters the Wycliffe allotment after inspection." Lady Millicent smiled. Of course. By late afternoon, the room had emptied. Matthew had gone downstairs with the rector. Sir Osbert had departed through the main entrance. Elinor remained, while Frederick's steward returned with the second key. "We should verify the purse before leaving," she said. Agreed. The rector inserted his key. The steward used the other. Both locks opened cleanly. Frederick pulled the cabinet doors wide. The shelf was empty. For one suspended moment, no one spoke. Then the steward stepped forward. "That is impossible." The rector held up his key. "Mine never left my pocket." "Nor mine," the steward said. Frederick examined the cabinet interior. No broken lock, no disturbed shelf, no purse. Elinor moved around the side. A narrow scratch ran fresh and pale along the rear hinge. "Has this cabinet always stood flush against the wall?" she asked. The steward looked uncertain. "I believe so." "Move it." 2 footmen dragged the cabinet forward. Dust marked the floor in a dark rectangle, except for one clean line where it had been shifted recently. Behind it, set into the paneling, was a narrow wooden door no wider than a ledger. Fresh sealant had been pressed around its edges. A strand of pearl grey silk clung to one hinge. Elinor touched it with the tip of her glove. This was opened today. An elderly footman near the doorway went pale. Frederick turned toward him. "You know what this is?" The man bowed. "The old clerk's hatch, Your Grace." Subscription books used to be passed through from the service passage. It was meant to stay closed after the office moved. Lady Millicent had said the same, yet the sealant was still soft enough to hold a thumb mark. Frederick looked toward the empty cabinet, then toward the grey silk thread in Elinor's hand. "Who has access to the service passage?" The elderly footman swallowed. "Household officers, Your Grace. Senior servants." and anyone carrying the old master keys. Elinor remembered the silver chatelaine at Lady Millicent's waist. The purse had not passed through either locked door. Someone who knew the Abbey's forgotten architecture had reached it from behind, removed it, and sealed the opening after the theft. Somewhere between the assembly room and the service passage, the ceremonial gold was already being prepared for its next appearance. The lower hall was full before the first grain sack reached the scale. Parish families stood along the walls with bowls and cloth bags. Landowners gathered beneath the gallery. The market keeper waited beside the official weights, while Redbourne's steward checked each wagon against the departure ledger. Every sack bore the new double-loop knot beneath the top cord. Every recorded weight matched. Even so, the room held the uneasy stillness of a place where everyone expected something to go wrong. Elinor stood beside Matthew, near the table marked for the Wycliffe bread room. Her father's coat had been brushed carefully, but the strain of the past week remained visible in his face. He had slept little since the purse vanished. Rumour had filled the silence faster than proof. Some said he had refused the gold publicly because a richer private arrangement had already been made. Others said Elinor had used Frederick's interest to secure grain while pretending to despise dependence. No one repeated those claims within Matthew's hearing until that morning. Sir Osbert made certain of that. He stood near the market clerk, speaking loudly enough for the nearest guests to listen. "A public weighing is useful," he said, "particularly when certain households have become so concerned with appearances." Matthew heard. Elinor felt his hand tighten around the head of his cane. Frederick, standing at the opposite side of the scale, looked toward Sir Osbert. "Say plainly what you intend." Sir Osbert lifted his brows. Only that refusal can be as theatrical as acceptance. A landowner near him gave a low laugh. "Perhaps, Mr. Wycliffe would not sell his daughter before breakfast," the man said, "but private terms are often more comfortable after dark." The words crossed the room. Matthew went still. Elinor saw the insult strike before his face revealed it. Her father had been willing to lose his home rather than make her part of a bargain, now that sacrifice had been turned into evidence of secret greed. Frederick moved one step forward. Elinor touched Matthew's sleeve first. "Papa." He looked at her, pale but upright. "I heard him. You do not have to remain." "Yes," he said, "I do." His voice was low. "If I leave now, they will call shame an admission." Frederick reached them. "Mr. Wycliffe, I can have the man removed." Matthew looked at the landowner, then back at Frederick. "No, let him stay long enough to hear the truth." Frederick inclined his head. He did not offer comfort Matthew had not asked for. The steward called for the first Wycliffe sack. 2 labourers lifted it from the wagon. The official top cord was intact. The double-loop knot remained tied beneath it. Elinor watched the side seam. A narrow line of blue ran close to the lower corner. Her pulse quickened. "That sack was not blue-seamed at departure," she said. The steward checked the ledger. "No, miss, the mark was plain cord." Sir Osbert stepped closer. "A repair may have been made in transit." "Without being recorded?" Frederick asked. "Carters mend sacks when needed." Elinor looked at the labourers. "Set it down." Before they could obey, the seam gave way. The sound was slight. A dry rip beneath the weight of the wheat. Grain poured across the floor in a pale rush, spilling over boots and table legs. People stepped back. A child cried out. Then something heavier struck the boards. The velvet purse rolled from the grain, hit the base of the scale, and burst open. Sovereigns scattered through the wheat. Gold flashed between the kernels. For one suspended moment, the entire hall seemed to stop breathing. Sir Osbert spoke first. There it is. Lady Millicent stood beneath the gallery in pearl grey silk. Her face arranged itself into sorrow. "Matthew," she said softly, using his Christian name as though grief gave her intimacy, "you refused it before witnesses." The landowner who had mocked him gave a short, satisfied sound. Refused the show, kept the price. The murmur spread at once. The purse was in his allotment. He must have known. The Duke offered more than sovereigns. Matthew swayed. Elinor caught his arm. Frederick was beside them in an instant, placing himself between Matthew and two market officers who had stepped forward. "No one touches him," Frederick said. One officer stopped. "Your Grace, stolen funds have been found in a sack assigned to his household. Then the funds will be examined." "A crowd is not an inquiry." Sir Osbert pointed toward the gold. The purse disappeared from Redbourne's locked cabinet and reappears inside Wycliffe Grange. "What further inquiry is needed?" Elinor released Matthew only when she felt his balance return. Then she knelt in the spilled wheat. Coins pressed against her gloves. The purse lay near the scale, its velvet torn along one side. She lifted the braided cord. The original sailor's splice remained near the clasp. Lower down, the cord had been cut again and tied with a rough temporary knot before being severed. "It was opened twice," she said. Frederick crouched several feet away, careful not to disturb the pattern of grain. "You are certain?" She held the cord toward the light. "The first splice is the one we saw at breakfast. This second cut was made afterward." Lady Millicent's expression did not alter. "That does not explain how it reached this sack." "No," Elinor said. "It proves only that someone handled it after it left the cabinet." Sir Osbert's mouth hardened, or that someone inside Wycliffe Grange opened it before hiding it. The sack never reached Wycliffe Grange. Frederick's steward stepped forward with the ledger. It came directly from the Western farm to this hall under recorded escort. Sir Osbert turned on him. "Then a Wycliffe servant could have reached it here." "Name one," Matthew said. His voice was weak but clear. "Name the servant you accuse." Sir Osbert spread his hands. "That is what an inquiry will determine." Elinor looked at the grain beneath her knees. Families had waited hours for it. Children watched the scattered wheat with fear that scandal had made it unusable. Evidence mattered. So did hunger. She rose. "Bring clean cloths." No one moved. "Mark where the purse fell. Collect every sovereign under witness. Then gather the wheat." The market keeper stared at her. The floor must remain undisturbed. The purse, cord, and position of the spill can be recorded. The grain belongs to the parish. Lady Millicent stepped forward. "You cannot proceed as though nothing has happened." "Something has happened," Elinor said. "That does not make these families less hungry." Sir Osbert looked toward Frederick. "Your Grace, surely you will not permit evidence to be handled by the woman most interested in clearing her father." Frederick did not look at him. He looked at Elinor. "What do you need?" The question carried across the hall. He was not asking where his authority should be placed. He was asking what service she required. Elinor pointed to a folded linen sheet on the supply table. "Hold that corner." Frederick removed his gloves and took the cloth. Before the county, the Duke of Redbourne stood where Elinor placed him. Mrs. Pritchard came forward next, carrying her empty sack. Then Mrs. Bell. The rector marked the purse location in chalk. The market keeper collected the sovereigns, one by one, and counted them aloud. Elinor directed the labourers as they gathered the cleanest wheat. The whispers continued, but certainty weakened each time Another villager stepped forward to help. Matthew lowered himself into a chair and watched. He had been publicly insulted, nearly seized, and judged by men who had never risked anything for another person's freedom. Still, when the first recovered portion was weighed, he said, "Serve the West cottages before ours." Frederick heard him. Something passed across his face that Elinor could not name. Respect had been there before. This was deeper. The last family received its share near sunset. Only then did Sir Osbert speak again. The Wycliffe bread room must be secured until every sack and ledger is examined. Elinor turned. No. Frederick looked toward the crowd, the scattered grain, and the doors through which the purse had somehow travelled. Fear tightened his expression. Further tampering cannot be allowed. Then guard the road, not the bread. The room contains records, measures, and remaining stores. It also contains tomorrow's food. Frederick's jaw set. Only until the magistrate arrives. Elinor saw the old lesson seize him. Act before uncertainty becomes danger. Command before delay causes harm. Frederick, she said. It was the first time she had spoken his name. He looked at her, startled by the intimacy of it. Do not protect evidence by making hungry people bear the cost. For one moment, she believed he would listen. Then he turned to his steward. Seal the bread room tonight. Post 2 men. No one enters until the inspection. The order fell into the hall like another accusation. Elinor stared at him. You stood beside me at the scale, and I am trying to prevent this from happening again. No, she said quietly. You are trying to make fear obey you. By sunset, 2 red-born men stood outside Wycliffe Grange, and the ducal seal lay across the bread room door. By sunrise, the ducal seal across the Wycliffe bread room had become more visible than the hunger it was meant to protect. Dark red wax covered the cord stretched between the door latch and the frame, stamped with the red-born stag. 2 estate men stood beneath the eaves, while villagers gathered in the yard, carrying bowls, sacks, and the quiet patience of people who had learned that complaint could cost them more than waiting. Elinor stood on the stone step beside Matthew. Her father had slept badly after the public accusation, but he had dressed before dawn and insisted upon being present when the first families arrived. Mrs. Bell came with 2 children. Mrs. Pritchard followed, carrying the little wooden measure she used at home. No one shouted. The silence was worse. One of the estate men removed his hat. Miss Wycliffe, His Grace's order is that no one enter until the magistrate, market keeper, and steward have inspected the room. We heard, Mrs. Bell said. Her youngest child looked at the sealed door, then at Elinor. Is there bread today? Elinor felt the question settle in the yard. There will be food today, she said. She turned to Mrs. Harris, who waited in the kitchen passage. Open the household flour store. The cook's face changed. Miss Elinor, that's nearly all we have. I know. There's enough for this house until the end of the week if we stretch it. Matthew leaned upon his cane. And if we do not stretch it, Mrs. Harris looked at him. 2 days, perhaps 3, then bring it. Sir, bring all but what you need for 1 loaf. Elinor glanced at him. Papa, your mother would haunt me if I fed myself before a child standing at my door. The attempt at humor barely concealed his exhaustion. Mrs. Harris obeyed. Benches were carried from the passage. Clean cloths were spread over 2 trestle tables. Villagers moved without instruction, arranging bowls and making space for one another. Within minutes, the Wycliffe yard had become a bread room without walls. Elinor measured the first portion herself. She did not speak about sacrifice. She simply filled Mrs. Bell's bowl, then the next and the next. The household bin emptied faster than she had feared. Mrs. Pritchard waited near the end of the line. When her turn came, she looked toward the Redbourne seal. They always tell us the delay is necessary. Elinor placed flour into her sack. Yes, necessary for whom? The words were quiet. They did not need an answer. Hoofbeats sounded along the lane. Frederick entered the yard with his steward, the market keeper, and a local magistrate riding behind him. He dismounted quickly. His gaze moved from the sealed door to the open household bins and then to the line of families. He understood before anyone explained. "Stop the distribution," he said. The words came from instinct. Elinor did not move. She filled another bowl. Frederick crossed the yard. "Elinor, do not use my name as though it gives you permission." He stopped several feet away. The villagers lowered their eyes, but no one left. Frederick looked at the nearly empty bin. "I ordered replacement grain from Redbourne. It should arrive within the hour. With your wagons, your men, and your authority. With food, today, and tomorrow, until when?" His jaw tightened. "As long as necessary." Elinor set down the measure. "That is the problem." "No. The problem is that someone used your household allotment to plant stolen gold. And your answer was to close the room that feeds the parish. To preserve evidence. At whose expense?" Frederick glanced toward the families. The inspection was meant to last only a few hours. Hunger also lasts a few hours at a time. The magistrate shifted near the gate, visibly wishing himself elsewhere. Frederick kept his voice low. "The records, measures, and remaining grain inside may identify who altered the sack. Then inspect them. That is why we are here. You sealed the room last night because someone might have entered before we arrived. Someone powerful enough to enter Redbourne's subscription room through a hidden service panel will not be stopped by making misses. Bells stand in a yard." Frederick's expression tightened with pain. "That is not what I intended." "I know." Elinor looked at the emptying flour bin. "Your intentions are often kind. Your decisions are often made before anyone else can tell you what they cost." Matthews stepped forward. "Your Grace, you are protecting evidence by charging the price to people who did not create the crime." Frederick turned to him. "The price will be repaid." "By whom?" Matthew asked. "You?" "Yes. Then it becomes another favor everyone must remember." The old fear inside Elinor sharpened. Help could be real and still create a chain. Frederick looked from Matthew to Elinor. "What would you have me do?" "You should have asked that before the seal was placed." "I am asking now." "Now we have already emptied our store." Mrs. Harris carried out the final sack. It was smaller than the others and tied with plain household cord. Frederick stared at it. "Do not open that." Elinor faced him. "Why?" "Because you will have nothing left. We have one loaf. That is not enough." "Neither was the bowl, Mrs. Bell brought. I can replace every ounce." "That does not restore the choice you took." His voice changed. "You think I would punish you if you refused my help?" "No." The honesty of her answer unsettled him. "I think you would never mean to punish anyone. I think you would build a world in which everyone waits for your permission and then call it safety." Frederick went very still. The yard seemed to narrow around them. Elinor heard herself breathe. She had not meant to say the next words before so many witnesses, but they had become too true to keep. "I had begun to want to trust you." Pain crossed his face without defense. "Elinor, I had begun to believe my father might be wrong about what wealth had prevented you from learning." She looked at the seal between them. "Then you became afraid, and command came first." He glanced at the magistrate, the villagers, the red wax. "You are right. Do not say it because you wish the argument to end. I am not. He turned toward the estate men. Remove the seal. The steward hesitated. Your Grace, the magistrate has not yet examined the room. Then he will examine it open, in the presence of the market keeper, rector when he arrives, and every person Miss Wycliffe chooses as witness. Sir Osbert will claim the evidence was compromised. Frederick looked back at Elinor. Then I will answer that claim. The estate men cut the cord. The wax seal broke with a dry snap and fell against the threshold. Frederick stepped aside. He did not enter first. The room is yours, he said. No, Elinor replied. It belongs to the work. She turned to Mrs. Pritchard and Mrs. Bell. Bring the clean measures. We will inventory before distribution. Frederick addressed his steward. Follow Miss Wycliffe's direction. Then he faced the villagers. The order was mine. It delayed your food. I believed urgency excused me from asking. It did not. No speech followed, no promise designed to restore admiration. He removed his gloves and helped carry the first grain sack into the yard. Elinor watched him work without ceremony. The sight hurt more than if he had defended himself. It would have been easier to leave a man who refused to learn. When the inspection began, the magistrate recorded the ledgers. The market keeper checked each weight. Nothing obvious had been moved. Frederick remained near the wall unless Elinor asked for something. He did not reach for authority merely because silence made him uncomfortable. By noon, every family had received an allotment. The Wycliffe household store stood empty. The bread room was open. The evidence remained under witness. Yet the distance between Elinor and Frederick had not closed. He approached only after the last bowl was filled. I am sorry, he said. You should be. I know. Do you? Enough to understand that apology does not restore trust. Elinor looked toward Matthew, who stood beneath the eaves watching them. This courtship cannot continue. Frederick's breath caught, but he did not move nearer because of the seal. Because the seal revealed the choice beneath it. I can choose differently, perhaps. Her hand closed around the silver thimble in her pocket. But I will not remain inside a courtship while you practice becoming safe. His face went pale beneath the restraint. You are ending it. Yes. The word cost more than she had expected. I had begun to want the answer to be different. Frederick lowered his head. For one moment, she saw not a duke, but a man discovering that repentance did not entitle him to relief. Then I will not ask you to comfort me for losing what I endangered. He turned to his steward. Remain until every record is copied and every sack is weighed. Take instruction from Miss Wycliffe. Then he looked at Elinor once more. I will leave. He walked to his horse alone. No one stopped him. Only after the gate closed did Elinor allow her hand to tremble. She bent to retrieve the broken seal before it was swept away. The wax had softened in the morning sun. Caught along the lower edge was a single strand of narrow blue thread. Elinor lifted it with the point of her needle. It was the same faded blue found in the altered sacks and beneath the hollow weight. The seal had been made with genuine Redbourne household wax. Someone inside the abbey had handled both. The courtship was over, but the mystery had just crossed Frederick's own threshold. Elinor placed the blue thread from the broken seal beside the altered sack seam, and the strand taken from beneath the hollow market weight. In the morning light, all three held the same faded color. The thread from the seal carried something else. A faint dust clung to it, darker than flour and too coarse for chalk. She rubbed it between her fingers and smelled grain, damp wood, and malt. Matthew stood at the end of the dining table, one hand resting on his cane. You believe it came from the abbey? The wax did. The thread may have passed through Redbourne, but the dust did not begin there. Mrs. Pritchard sat near the window with her preserved flour sack at her feet. Agnes Vale, Matthew's widowed sister, had arrived before breakfast to remain with her and the children. The rector stood beside the hearth with the parish account book closed beneath his hand. Elinor had asked for witnesses, not because she distrusted Mrs. Pritchard, but because the widow had too much to lose for her word to be left undefended. You said the flour tasted bitter, Elinor said. Mrs. Pritchard nodded. My boy spat out the first bite. I told him not to waste it. Shame entered her voice. Elinor moved closer. You were trying to feed him. It didn't feel like enough. That is not your failure. Mrs. Pritchard looked toward Matthew. Sir Osbert's agent came again last night. He said, the written promise won't matter if the cottage changes hands. Matthew's expression hardened. The rector and churchwardens witnessed it. He said powerful men always find another paper. Elinor heard the old fear beneath the words. Help could be real and still fail when power changed its mind. Then we will not rely upon one promise, she said. We will rely upon proof. Mrs. Harris brought a clean sieve and 2 bowls. Elinor broke the market seal only after the rector recorded its condition. She poured a small quantity of flour through the mesh. Fine pale powder fell into the first bowl. Coarse barley meal remained above, mixed with white particles that settled heavily against the wire. The rector touched one with the end of a spoon. Chalk, likely, Elinor said. The sack was made to appear fuller after wheat was removed. Agnes looked at the blue side seam. Whoever did this needed thread strong enough to open and close more than once, and knew a naval repair stitch, Elinor said. There is a sailmaker on Harrow Lane, Agnes replied. Mr. Cobb. His brother supplied naval stores during the war. Within the hour, Elinor, Agnes, the rector, and Redbourne's steward travelled to Harrow Lane in Matthew's smaller carriage. Frederick did not come. He had sent his steward with a single instruction written in his own hand. Follow Miss Wycliffe's direction. Do not act beyond it. Elinor read the note once and returned it without comment. Mr. Cobb's workshop stood behind a brick yard hung with lengths of canvas. He was a narrow man with a grey beard and hands permanently darkened by tar. He examined the blue seam beneath a magnifying lens, then drew one inner loop free with an awl. Purser's work, he said, used when official cords could not be broken. Who nearby knows it? Elinor asked. Mr. Cobb glanced toward the rector before answering. Abel Voss, served as a purser's assistant, came home after the peace. Sir Osbert's warehouse hired him last winter. Did he buy thread from you? 3 spools, this colour. Mr. Cobb turned the cutting over. He also worked at the old malt house before Calthorpe took him on. Elinor placed the thread from the ducal wax beside the seam. Mr. Cobb touched the dark dust clinging to it. Barley malt. The rector looked at her. The same material found in Mrs. Pritchard's flour, and the same dust in the parish storehouse. Elinor folded the samples away. Where is the old malt house? 2 miles east, near the abandoned drying sheds. The Redbourne steward shifted. His Grace can send men. Not yet, Elinor said. If Voss is hiding, armed riders will send him farther. The old malt house stood beside a narrow stream, its roof sagging above boarded windows. One side door hung open. Elinor entered with Agnes and the rector, while the steward remained outside with the groom. The air smelled of damp barley and cold ash. Broken sacks lay near a wall. Most had been stripped of markings, but one corner still bore a Redbourne stag beneath black soot. Someone tried to burn these, Agnes said. Elinor crouched beside the sack. Blue stitches ran along the side. Near it lay a folded wage chit bearing Abel Voss's name and 3 weeks of unpaid earnings. He did not flee because he had money, Elinor said. He came back because this was where he expected to find what he was owed. The rector pointed toward the floor. Fresh footprints crossed the malt dust and led toward the rear door. Elinor followed them into the yard. A dark coat hung from a nail beneath the eaves. One cuff was torn. Blue thread clung to it. In the pocket, she found a scrap of paper with 2 words written badly but clearly. Drying shed. "He is close," Agnes said, "or someone wants us to think so." Elinor looked toward the hill, where 3 abandoned sheds stood above the stream. Either way, Sir Osbert's men may be looking too. She turned to the steward. "Send this to his grace. Tell him Voss may be in the northern drying shed. He is to approach without Calthorpe agents, without livery, and without public arrest." The steward hesitated. "You ask his grace to go himself. I ask him to protect the witness without frightening him." The steward bowed. "I will carry the message." They returned to Wycliffe Grange by noon. A note from Frederick waited on the hall table. Elinor recognized his hand before breaking the seal. "I was wrong to close the bread room. I was more wrong because fear made me believe asking would cost time we did not have. The market square, official scales, and Redbourne officers are available to you without condition. I will not interfere unless you invite me. I do not ask for forgiveness or for the courtship to resume." Elinor read the note twice. He had not promised perfection. He had not argued that his intentions deserved mercy. He had offered authority without attaching himself to it. Matthew entered from the drawing room. From him, yes, what does he want? She handed him the page. He read it slowly. Nothing. "That may be why I believe it." Matthew returned the note. "Will you accept his help? The authority, not the courtship. A necessary distinction." Elinor sat at the writing desk. Her reply contained 1 line. "Make the market safe. I will bring the truth." She sealed it before doubt could change the wording. Near dusk, hoofbeats sounded in the lane. Frederick's steward arrived alone, carrying a small leather packet and news. "Voss was found in the northern drying shed," he said. His grace approached with only 1 groom. Voss surrendered himself after he was shown the rector's written protection. Elinor opened the packet. Inside lay a warehouse tally marked with Sir Osbert's initials and a 2nd wage chit, both kept by Voss because his pay had been withheld. "Will he speak?" she asked. "He says Sir Osbert means to blame the entire scheme on him. He will testify if his safety and wages are placed in writing. Then the rector and magistrate must witness it. His grace has already requested that." The steward paused. "There is more." He handed her a printed notice. It accused Mrs. Pritchard of stealing Grain and Elinor of purchasing false testimony through ducal favour. Beneath it was a 2nd document, an eviction notice for Mrs. Pritchard's cottage dated for the end of the week. Mrs. Pritchard read it over Elinor's shoulder. Her face went white. He said the promise wouldn't matter. Elinor folded the notice carefully. "Then we will make the truth matter more." The steward reached into his coat once more. "Voss, says Sir Osbert's clerk, prepared a statement in his name before anyone found him." "A confession?" "Yes. It claims the altered sacks were repaired at Wycliffe Grange." Matthew looked toward the southern storehouse through the darkening window. "They are not only destroying evidence, they are writing the answer before the question is asked." Elinor placed the false notice beside the blue thread, the hollow weight, and the preserved flour. The mystery had narrowed. Someone inside Redbourne had planted the purse. Someone inside Sir Osbert's warehouse had corrupted the grain. Now both schemes were being forced toward Wycliffe Grange. Outside, the first market bell of evening sounded across the fields. Frederick was making the square safe. Elinor intended to make it impossible for anyone to look away. Frederick found Lady Millicent in the west drawing-room before breakfast, seated beside a fire that had not yet warmed the high-ceilinged room. She wore pearl grey silk, the same shade as the strand caught behind the subscription cabinet. A silver chatelaine hung at her waist, its keys arranged with habitual precision. She did not rise when he entered. "You have been searching service passages before dawn," she said. "How industrious." Frederick closed the door behind him. On the table between them, he placed 4 objects: a copied page from the household repair book, a small key removed from the chatelaine inventory, a statement signed by the elderly footman, and the strand of pearl grey silk Elinor had found caught in the rear hinge. Lady Millicent looked at the objects without touching them. "What conclusion am I expected to admire?" "The cabinet's rear panel was sealed yesterday afternoon with compound ordered under your authority. The old office was untidy. I instructed repairs. After the purse disappeared, before anyone discovered it had disappeared." Frederick held her gaze. "The footman says you ordered the cabinet moved before the breakfast, to clean behind it. He also says your personal footman entered the service passage while the purse was locked inside. Servants enter service passages. That is their purpose." Frederick placed one more paper on the table. The Eastern Passage ledger records his name at the same hour. Lady Millicent's fingers tightened around the handle of her teacup. "You have become remarkably suspicious of your own household." "My household wax held blue thread from the altered grain sacks." "Then your household has been contaminated by Sir Osbert's negligence." "Perhaps." Frederick looked toward the keys at her waist. "Where is the old subscription key?" Her expression changed only slightly. "I do not know what you mean." "The key to the rear panel." "There was no key. The hatch used a latch. The carpenter who sealed it remembers otherwise." Silence filled the room. Frederick held out his hand. "Your keys." Lady Millicent laughed once quietly. "You cannot be serious." "Give them to me. I managed Redbourne's charities before you were old enough to understand what the accounts meant. And because my mother died, no one questioned the authority you gathered in the years that followed." The words cost him more than he expected. Lady Millicent had taught him household order after grief emptied the Abbey of Warmth. She had shown him which signatures mattered, which tenants required firmness, which requests could be delayed without consequence. He had once believed her composure was proof of wisdom. Now he saw how often it had taught him to mistake silence for consent. "You would strip me of every duty because a piece of silk resembles my gown?" she asked. "No, because you used Redbourne access to shape suspicion around a family already under threat." "You have no proof I touched the purse." "Not yet." Frederick's voice remained even. "I have proof you knew the cabinet's hidden entrance, ordered it moved, controlled the passage, and concealed the repair." Lady Millicent rose. "And for that you will humiliate your own blood?" "I am removing you from charitable subscriptions, grain correspondence, service store authority, and household contracts until the magistrate completes his inquiry." Her face went white. "Frederick, the steward will collect every key. You do not understand what this will do to Redbourne's reputation." "I understand exactly. The county will say your household cannot govern itself. Then we will govern it honestly." She stepped around the table. All because Elinor Wycliffe refused you and taught you to despise your own rank. She did not teach me to despise it. He looked at the pearl-grey silk caught beside the evidence. She taught me that rank does not make secrecy honorable. Lady Millicent's composure broke for one breath. You think she will return because you punish me. She may never return. Then, what are you buying with this? The question struck because it echoed the man he had been. Frederick answered slowly, nothing. He took the copied orders from the table. That is the point. When he left the drawing room, the steward waited outside with 2 senior servants. Frederick handed him the written removal of authority. Collect every household key. Record each one before witnesses. Send the service ledger, repair book, and footman's statement to the magistrate and rector. Yes, your grace. Do not release Lady Millicent's guilt as fact. Release only the evidence. The steward bowed. And the grain mark? Suspend it until every store is inspected by the market keeper and 2 officers not employed by Redbourne or Sir Osbert. That will damage trade. Then trade will recover after trust does. Frederick spent the next hour with his solicitor, but he refused to let the meeting become another exercise in prepared control. He ordered a temporary stay sought on the Wycliffe debt, not repayment. Any transfer would be arranged through trustees named by the solicitor and approved by Matthew Wycliffe. Redbourne would receive no claim upon the southern storehouse. The solicitor stared at him. That removes every advantage attached to the original settlement. Yes, and if Miss Wycliffe never marries you, the arrangement remains. By noon, Frederick was riding alone toward Mrs. Pritchard's cottage. He carried no basket, no purse, and no servant to witness his virtue. Agnes Vale opened the door and studied him before permitting him inside. Mrs. Pritchard sat near the hearth with the eviction notice folded in her lap. Her children had been sent to the next room. Frederick removed his gloves. Mrs. Pritchard, I came to apologize. She looked wary. For Sir Osbert? For myself. He remained standing until she indicated the chair opposite her. I sealed the Wycliffe bedroom. I told myself I was preserving evidence. I did not ask what the order would cost you before I gave it. Mrs. Pritchard looked down at the notice. The room was opened. After Miss Wycliffe made the cost impossible for me to ignore. And now I am asking what protection would matter. The widow gave a bitter little smile. Powerful men always ask that after they've already decided. Frederick accepted the blow, then decide for me. She looked up sharply. I want the cottage promise written, so Sir Osbert can't tear it apart. I want my boy's place protected until he finds other work, and I don't want grain handed to me before witnesses as though I should kneel for it. Frederick nodded. The rector and churchwardens will hold the undertaking. Sir Osbert's creditor will receive notice. Your son's position will be covered until the inquiry ends, or he may transfer to Redbourne stables under a written wage agreement if he chooses. Not because I helped Miss Wycliffe. No condition. And if she never forgives you? Frederick looked toward the small hearth, where one thin loaf rested beneath a cloth. Then the promise remains. Mrs. Pritchard studied him for a long moment. That is a better answer. It was not absolution. He did not ask for it. Before leaving, he repeated the apology at Mrs. Bell's cottage, where the youngest child had gone to sleep after eating the flour Elinor gave away. No speeches, no coins, only the truth of what he had done and the written steps being taken to prevent it happening again. Near sunset, Frederick stopped at Wycliffe Grange. Matthew stood at the gate while 2 clerks copied records from the southern storehouse. Elinor was not visible. Frederick felt the absence as he dismounted. "You have removed Lady Millicent from authority," Matthew said. "Temporarily, pending inquiry. And the debt? A stay has been requested. Any later transfer will be through trustees you approve. Redbourne will gain no access rights." Matthew rested both hands on his cane. "My daughter did not ask you to do this." "No. Do you expect her to hear of it?" "She will hear what the magistrate records. Nothing more from me." Matthew studied him. "And if she never resumes the courtship?" Frederick looked toward the dark windows of the house. "Then the grain must still be honest. Mrs. Pritchard must still keep her cottage. Sir Osbert must still answer. Lady Millicent must still lose the authority she misused." Matthew's expression shifted by the smallest degree. "You are beginning to understand what a good act costs." "What?" "The right to claim reward." Before Frederick could answer, a rider approached at speed from the lower road. The steward dismounted near the gate and handed Frederick 2 printed notices. The first accused him of instability and Elinor of manipulating ducal policy through wounded pride. The second announced that Sir Osbert's office would enforce the Wycliffe seizure on the morning of the public market test. "There is more," the steward said. "Voss has agreed to speak, but Sir Osbert claims he stole grain and forged the tally. His men are collecting damaged sacks from the lower warehouses." "Burning them?" Frederick asked. "Some already have been." Matthew looked toward the southern storehouse. "He intends to destroy the evidence and take the building before Elinor can speak." Frederick folded the notices. The old instinct rose in him. "Ride to Calthorpe. Seize the warehouses. Order every man detained." He let the impulse pass. "Place Mrs. Pritchard and Voss under parish protection," he said. "Secure the market square. Do not touch Sir Osbert until the magistrate is present." The steward bowed. Frederick looked once more toward the house. Behind an upstairs curtain, a shadow moved and disappeared. Whether Elinor had seen him, he could not know. He mounted without approaching the door. For the first time in his life, he was preparing the ground without deciding who must stand upon it. Abel Voss arrived at Wycliffe Grange before noon, under the rector's written protection, accompanied by Frederick's steward and a churchwarden who had agreed to witness every word. He looked older than Elinor had expected. His shoulders were stooped from warehouse labor, and his hands bore the small scars of rope, canvas, and coarse grain. Mrs. Pritchard sat near the window with Agnes Vale beside her. Matthew remained by the hearth, pale but composed. Frederick stood near the door, not at the center of the room. Elinor noticed that he had placed himself where he could protect the witnesses without appearing to preside over them. Voss held his cap between both hands. "I opened the sacks," he said. "I won't deny it." The rector dipped his pen. "At whose direction?" "Pike, the warehouse clerk. He said the order came from Sir Osbert's office." "What exactly were you told to do?" Elinor asked. Voss glanced toward her. "After the sacks were weighed, I loosened the side seam. Wheat came out. Barley meal went in. Chalk, too, when they needed the weight to seem right." Mrs. Pritchard closed her eyes. Voss looked at her flour sack and lowered his head. "I knew families would get less." "Why continue?" Matthew asked. "My wages were held 3 weeks, then 5. Pike said if I left, Sir Osbert would tell every warehouse from here to Portsmouth that I stole naval stores." "Did you alter the market weight?" Elinor asked. "No, Pike handled the brass set. I only saw it once after the base was opened." "And the ceremonial purse?" Frederick asked. Voss shook his head. "Never saw it, until people said it came from the Wycliffe sack. That wasn't our work." The distinction mattered. Two crimes had overlapped. One had stolen food through Sir Osbert's supply chain. The other had planted gold to destroy the Wycliffes. Elinor placed the warehouse tally and unpaid wage chits on the table. "Are these yours?" "The wage papers are. The tally came from Pike's desk." "Why keep it?" "Because I thought they'd blame me when the grain was found short." Frederick's expression hardened. "They have." The steward produced a printed statement bearing Voss's name. It declared that the blue-seamed sacks had been repaired at Wycliffe Grange, and that Elinor had paid him to accuse Sir Osbert. Voss stared at it. "I never signed that." "Can you write your name?" the rector asked. Voss took the pen awkwardly and marked the page with a rough A and V joined by a descending line. The false statement carried a neat full signature. The difference was immediate. "Pike knew I used a mark," Voss said. "Sir Osbert knew too." Mrs. Pritchard's hands tightened in her lap. "They came to my cottage again this morning." Frederick turned toward her. "Who?" "A Calthorpe agent. He said if I spoke tomorrow, my boy would be dismissed before sunset." "Your tenancy is protected," the rector said. "For now," she replied. "But he said the paper won't matter once Sir Osbert owns the road and the storehouse." Elinor crossed to her. "You do not have to testify publicly, Mrs." Pritchard looked at the children's coats hanging near the passage door. "If I don't, he'll say I lied. He may say that regardless. Then I want my children here tomorrow, not at the cottage." Matthew stepped forward. "They will stay at Wycliffe Grange." Mrs. Pritchard looked at him in alarm. "Sir, your own house may be taken." "Then there will still be one room until they finish carrying the chairs." His attempt at dry humor broke something in her face. She covered her mouth. Matthew rested one hand upon her shoulder. "You are not evidence before you are a mother." The words settled over the room. Elinor looked toward Frederick. He had heard them too. Outside, carriage wheels sounded on the gravel. Lady Millicent entered under the supervision of Redbourne's steward, her face composed but drained of colour. No maid followed her. The silver chatelaine was gone from her waist. Behind her came the elderly footman from the assembly room and the local magistrate. Frederick did not greet his cousin. "You asked to speak before the market test," he said. "I asked to prevent this household from making a spectacle of Redbourne." Lady Millicent's gaze moved across the room and stopped at the evidence on the table. Elinor saw the moment she understood how much had been found. Frederick placed the rear panel key beside the strand of pearl-grey silk. Then came the service passage ledger, the fresh sealant order, and a small piece of burgundy velvet taken from Lady Millicent's locked workbox. The footman's hands trembled as he gave his statement. Lady Millicent ordered. The cabinet moved before the breakfast. Later, she gave me the panel key and told me to open the hatch from the passage. I removed the purse and carried it to the eastern store. Lady Millicent turned on him. "You were told to move subscription records." "No, my lady." His voice shook, but he continued. "The purse was in my hands." The magistrate looked toward Lady Millicent. "Do you deny the key belonged to you?" She held herself very still. "No." "Do you deny ordering the panel opened?" A long silence followed. Elinor watched Lady Millicent calculate. Denial was no longer control. Confession, however, might still allow her to choose the boundaries of guilt. "I removed the purse," she said at last. Matthew's face hardened. Mrs. Pritchard drew in a sharp breath. Frederick did not move. "Why?" Elinor asked. Lady Millicent looked at her with open dislike. "Because Frederick had lost judgment. You refused him. Yet every action he took afterward elevated your family. Grain, protection, public deference. I intended to show him what everyone else would eventually believe, that my father took money secretly, that your refusal was performance. How did the purse reach the grain sack? The question came from the magistrate. Lady Millicent answered without looking away from Elinor. I carried it through the Eastern Service Store. My footman placed it inside the Wycliffe allotment sack after the first weighing. Frederick's voice was cold. You used my household access to frame an innocent man. I protected Redbourne from a woman who made you weak. No, he said. You protected your authority from a woman who made it visible. Lady Millicent's expression cracked. I did not know about the adulterated grain. Sir Osbert's name remained unspoken, but his presence filled the room. You worked with him, Elinor said, only to arrange access and timing. He said the Wycliffes were obstructing order. He never told me wheat was being stolen. Then two schemes met in one sack, Matthew said. One to profit from hunger, one to punish dignity. Lady Millicent looked toward him. I did not intend harm to the parish. You intended harm to my daughter and me, Matthew replied. The parish simply stood close enough to suffer. The magistrate ordered Lady Millicent's full written statement taken before she left the room. Frederick required every remaining household key surrendered and forbade her departure from Redbourne until the inquiry concluded. She turned to him at the door. You are destroying your own family name. No, he said. I am refusing to let it conceal what you did. When she was gone, Elinor spread the evidence across the table. The blue seam, the hollow weight, Mrs. Pritchard's flower, Voss's tally, the purse cord, the rear panel key. Tomorrow cannot be another drawing-room accusation, she said. The harm happened at the market. The truth must be shown there. Frederick waited. Tell me what you need. 2 untouched sacks from the latest delivery, the county standard weight, the false brass weight, a clean sieve, the purse cord. Voss, only if he chooses. I'll testify, Voss said. If the protection is written. It will be, the rector replied. Elinor looked at Mrs. Pritchard. And you decide for yourself. The widow drew a breath. My children stay here. They will, Matthew said. Then I'll speak. Frederick faced Elinor. Where do you want me? Beside the scale, not before me. He held her gaze. Beside the scale. At dawn the next morning, the creditor's agents arrived under lawful writ before the church bell. They carried inventory tags, ledgers, and empty crates. One man entered the Wycliffe Hall and marked the first chair for removal. Another opened the drawing-room doors. Across the fields, the market bell began to ring. Matthew stood in the passage as his furniture was carried toward the cart. Elinor fastened her cloak and placed the silver thimble in her pocket. Let them take what they can lift, he said. We will take what they cannot. She looked at him. What is that? The truth. Then Elinor walked past the men carrying her father's chairs into the road. At the market cross, Frederick was already waiting beside the scale. The market square was already crowded when Elinor arrived, but the scale stood clear beneath the market cross. The local magistrate waited beside the market keeper. The rector and 2 churchwardens stood near the evidence table. Sir Osbert remained beneath the awning of the grain office, with Pike at his shoulder, his face composed and his gloves immaculate. Lady Millicent stood apart under Redbourne supervision, stripped of keys and household authority, but not yet of pride. Frederick was where Elinor had ordered him to be, beside the scale, not before her. At the edge of the square, the creditor's solicitor held a folded writ while 2 agents waited beside the cart carrying the first pieces of Wycliffe furniture. Matthew arrived moments later with Agnes Vale. He leaned heavily on his cane, yet his head remained high. The same landowner who had mocked him at the grain hall looked away. Elinor placed the evidence on the table one item at a time. The blue-seamed sack, the plain sack, the hollow brass weight, the sealed county standard, Mrs. Pritchard's flower, the sailor-spliced purse cord, the rear panel key, the warehouse tally. No speeches opened the inquiry. The magistrate simply nodded. "Proceed, Miss Wycliffe." Elinor faced the crowd. "This began with bread, recorded at full weight and delivered short. It continued with sacks that appeared sealed, a market weight that lied, and gold planted where suspicion would fall most easily." She rested one hand on the plain sack. "We will show each method separately." The market keeper weighed the plain sack first. Its top cord bore the double loop knot recorded at departure. The county standard balanced exactly against the ledgered weight. Elinor turned to the second sack. Blue thread ran along its side. Abel Voss stepped forward under the rector's protection. His face had gone pale, but his voice held. "This is the seam I used." Sir Osbert spoke from beneath the awning, a confessed thief demonstrating his own trick. Voss looked at him. A guilty man can still tell the truth. Elinor handed him the awl. "Show them without touching the top cord." Voss lifted one hidden loop. The blue seam loosened. He drew the inner thread through, and the side of the sack opened wide enough for several pounds of wheat to be removed. The official cord remained intact. A murmur passed through the square. Voss closed the seam again. From several feet away, the sack appeared untouched. "Who ordered this work?" the magistrate asked. "Pike?" Voss said. "He said it came from Sir Osbert's office." Pike stepped forward. "He lies to save himself." The rector placed the unpaid wage chits beside the warehouse tally. These were found in Voss's possession before he received protection. The market keeper studied the marks. "This tally matches Calthorpe warehouse lots." Sir Osbert lifted one hand. "A tally may be stolen." "So may grain," Elinor said. She turned to Mrs. Pritchard. "You may speak or remain silent, Mrs." Pritchard looked toward Wycliffe Grange, where her children waited under Matthew's protection. Then she stepped beside the table. "I bought £10. I received a little more than 8. When I complained, Calthorpe's agent said cottages change tenants." Sir Osbert's expression cooled. "You were frightened and mistaken." "I was frightened," she said. "I was not mistaken." Elinor opened the flour sack only after the rector confirmed it sealed, and the market keeper recorded the weight. She poured the contents through the clean sieve. Pale flour fell into the bowl. Coarse barley meal and white chalk remained above it. Several women in the crowd recognized the mixture at once. One began to weep quietly. Another held up a loaf and said, "This is why it would not rise." Elinor lifted the hollow brass weight. This was used at the market. The keeper set it against the sealed county standard. The beam dropped. The parish weight was lighter. He loosened the base before the magistrate and exposed the hollow centre. Blue lint still clung beneath the rim. Sir Osbert's composure cracked. Pike was responsible for daily market equipment. Pike turned sharply. "You approved the replacement set." "Silence," Sir Osbert said. The magistrate looked between them. "The contract is suspended immediately. No Calthorpe store, cart, or weight will be used until the accounts are examined. Proceedings for recovery will follow." Sir Osbert stepped toward the table. "You cannot ruin county trade on the word of servants and women." Frederick moved only one pace. He did not place himself before Elinor. The market keeper verified the weight. The magistrate witnessed the seam. The rector holds the records. Choose your next words carefully. Elinor took up the purse cord. The grain fraud explains the missing wheat. It does not explain the gold found in the Wycliffe allotment. Lady Millicent's face hardened. Elinor placed the rear panel key beside the cord. The elderly footman gave his statement before the crowd. He described moving the cabinet, opening the hidden hatch, removing the purse, and carrying it to the Eastern Service Store under Lady Millicent's order. The magistrate asked, "Do you deny this?" Lady Millicent looked toward Frederick, perhaps expecting blood to matter more than truth. He gave her nothing. "No," she said. The word travelled across the square. "I removed the purse." A hush followed. "And placed it in the Wycliffe sack?" Elinor asked. "My footman did, at your direction." "Yes." Matthew closed his eyes for one brief moment. Elinor saw the strain in his face and understood what the admission restored. Not his pride, his sacrifice. "Why?" the magistrate asked. Lady Millicent lifted her chin. "Mr. Wycliffe rejected public help while benefiting from Frederick's interest. I intended to expose the contradiction." "There was no contradiction," Elinor said. "My father refused to make my future part of a bargain. You planted gold because you needed poverty to have a price." The landowner who had mocked Matthew lowered his head. No applause followed. None was needed. The silence had changed. It no longer accused. The creditor's solicitor approached the magistrate with the writ. "The Wycliffe seizure is already in progress." Elinor placed the false docket and warehouse tally before him. The valuation of the southern storehouse was pursued through the same interests, now under inquiry. Sir Osbert's connected lending house sought control of the route used in the grain diversion. Frederick's solicitor stepped forward with a petition for temporary stay. Signed that morning, the magistrate reviewed it, then addressed the creditor's men. No further removal until the contract fraud and debt connection are examined. At the edge of the square, one agent took an inventory tag from Matthew's chair. Another turned the cart back toward Wycliffe Grange. Matthew did not smile. He simply breathed. Sir Osbert's contract authority was removed. Pike was detained for formal questioning. Lady Millicent surrendered the final written record of household access. The longer claims, repayments, and accountings would come later. For that morning, the immediate wrongs had names and witnesses. Elinor gathered the evidence into order. Only after she had finished did Frederick step fully beside the scale. "There is one more failure to name," he said. The crowd turned toward him. "Mine." Elinor looked at him. He did not seek her permission to avoid blame. He had waited only to avoid taking her place. "I prepared a marriage settlement before asking whether Miss Wycliffe wanted my hand. I believed security made pressure harmless. Later, when the purse appeared, I sealed the Wycliffe bedroom. I believed urgency excused me from asking what my order would cost." His voice carried without effort. "It did not." Lady Millicent looked away. Sir Osbert stared at the ground. Frederick continued, "Mr. Wycliffe told me his daughter needed a good man, not a rich one. I do not stand here claiming I have become one. Goodness is not proved by a speech. It must survive refusal, inconvenience, and time." He gestured to his solicitor. "The Wycliffe debt will be placed under temporary trustees approved by Mr. Wycliffe. Redbourne will receive no claim upon the southern storehouse. No marriage condition exists." Matthew studied him for a long moment. "And if my daughter never accepts you?" Frederick looked at Elinor. "Then the terms remain." The answer settled more deeply than any declaration of love could have done. Elinor faced the crowd one final time. The truth did not arrive because a duke announced it. Mrs. Pritchard kept the flour. Abel Voss kept the tally. Mr. Cobb identified the stitch. The market keeper tested the weight. My father refused money when accepting it would have saved his house. She looked toward the returned cart, beginning its journey up the road. People carried pieces of the truth until no one could dismiss them alone. The magistrate closed the record. The crowd began to break apart, but Frederick remained beside the scale. He did not approach until Elinor turned toward him. "May I call tomorrow?" he asked. No settlement, no ring, no audience waiting for her answer. Elinor looked at the man who had finally learned that public accountability did not purchase private forgiveness. "Come as Frederick," she said. "Leave the settlement at Redbourne." He bowed his head. "I will." The next afternoon, he arrived at Wycliffe Grange alone. In his open hand lay her mother's silver thimble, found beside the market scale and returned without polish, velvet, or promise. Frederick stood in the Wycliffe Hall with Elinor's mother's silver thimble resting in his open palm. He had not polished it. The worn edge remained dull, and the tiny dents made by years of sewing were untouched. Elinor looked at the thimble before she looked at him. "You found it beside the scale." "Yes, and brought it back exactly as it was. I thought anything else would be another way of deciding for you." Matthew stood in the drawing-room doorway, both hands resting on his cane. Frederick turned toward him. "Mr. Wycliffe, may I speak with your daughter in the kitchen garden?" Matthew studied him for a long moment. "The door remains open. Mrs. Harris will be in the passage." "Of course." Elinor took the thimble from Frederick's hand. The metal was warm. She closed her fingers around it and led him through the rear hall into the walled garden. The paths were narrow, bordered by herbs, late beans, and 2 pear trees that had grown unevenly against the brick. Frederick walked beside her without offering his arm. At the wooden bench, he waited until she sat, then remained standing until she looked toward the empty space. Only then did he join her. For several breaths, neither spoke. The crisis was over. That made honesty more difficult. There was no crowd to persuade, no villain to expose, no family waiting for bread. Only 2 people, and the question of what remained when urgency no longer shaped every choice. "I did not come to propose again," Frederick said. "That is wise. I did not bring a ring, wiser still." A faint smile touched his face and disappeared. "I came to ask whether I may court you properly." Elinor turned the thimble between her fingers. "You already asked once." "I asked before I understood what I was asking." "And what do you understand now?" Frederick looked toward the garden wall. "That love cannot be built on the relief of another person's desperation. That protection, offered without consent, may still feel like danger. That apology does not restore trust merely because it costs pride." Elinor listened. He had learned the language. That was not yet the same as learning the life. "There is something you still do not understand," she said then. "Tell me." "I am not afraid of poverty." He looked at her. "I am afraid of what help becomes when the person giving it believes the receiver owes them gratitude forever." The old memory rose again, her mother smiling across a tea table while a relative repeated the price of a fever physician. "My mother accepted assistance when she was ill. The person who gave it never allowed the debt to end. Every kindness afterward became proof that my mother should remain agreeable." Frederick's face tightened. "And you fear marriage to me would become the same." "I fear loving a man whose fortune makes every disagreement unequal." "That fear is reasonable." The answer came without protest. Elinor searched his face. "You do not resent it?" "I regret that my first proposal gave it more reason." He folded his hands loosely between his knees. There is something I should tell you as well. When I was a boy, my father delayed every unpleasant decision. He trusted men who lied to him because confronting them felt disloyal. By the time the truth reached him, tenants had suffered through a winter that should never have happened. You told me some of this, not all. Frederick drew a slow breath. I was helpless then. I hated it. I decided that when I held authority, no one would suffer because I hesitated. I made speed into virtue. I made command into proof that I was not powerless. Elinor's expression softened, though she did not reach for him. And when the purse appeared, I was afraid the evidence would vanish again. I returned to the lesson I had trusted longest. Control first, yes. Fear does not excuse it. No. He looked at her then. I do not ask you to cure that fear for me. I ask only for the chance to show you that I can choose differently. Elinor lowered her gaze to the thimble. And if I say no, the debt terms remain independent. Mrs. Pritchard's protection remains. The grain inquiry continues. Nothing is withdrawn. And if I say yes to courtship but no to marriage later, pain moved through his face, but he did not look away. Then I will grieve it without punishing you. That answer was not grand. It was better than grand. Elinor extended her hand. Frederick did not take it at once. He waited until she turned her palm upward. Only then did his fingers close around hers. You may court me, she said. Slowly. Slowly, he agreed. The months that followed tested him in quieter ways than scandal had done. Frederick called twice each week. He attended parish meetings when invited and remained away when he was not. One afternoon, the vestry asked him to override a dispute involving a tenant whose lease repair had been delayed. The old Frederick would have summoned the steward and settled it before supper. Instead, he found Elinor in the Wycliffe garden and explained the matter. They expect me to decide, he said. Do you want to? Part of me does, and the rest knows the tenant has not yet been heard. Then wait. Frederick looked toward the road, where the vestry messenger remained with his horse. Waiting still cost him. Elinor could see it. Will you resent me if delay creates criticism? She asked. No. Will you solve it another way without telling me? No. Then let the tenant speak tomorrow. Frederick nodded. Tomorrow. He returned to the vestry and said exactly that. No threat followed, no withdrawn favor, no coldness at his next call. The dispute was resolved after both sides were heard, and the tenant received the repairs owed under the lease. Elinor understood then that change had survived an ordinary day. There had been no audience to reward him, no crisis to shame him into patience. At their next walk, she reached for his hand first. By Michaelmas, Matthew no longer watched Frederick as though expecting a solicitor to emerge from every hedge. The Wycliffe debt had been placed under trustees approved by him. Redbourne held no right to the southern storehouse. Mrs. Pritchard's tenancy was secured through trustees appointed by the vestry, witnessed by the rector and church wardens. Abel Voss continued giving evidence and found work under Mr. Cobb, though no one pretended confession erased his part in the fraud. Sir Osbert lost his supply contracts and faced proceedings for recovery on behalf of the affected parishes. Lady Millicent repaid the ceremonial purse and left Redbourne to live with relatives in Bath. She held no household keys, charitable authority, or contract power. Frederick never asked Elinor to praise him for any of it. On a clear afternoon in the kitchen garden, with Matthew standing near the open door, Frederick asked Elinor to marry him. No settlement lay between them. No creditor waited at the gate. I cannot promise I will never act from fear, he said. I can promise that I will not make your love responsible for correcting me. Matthew looked at him. A good man is not one who never needs correction. He is one who does not punish the person who corrects him. Frederick bowed his head. I will remember. Matthew turned to Elinor. The choice is yours. It always had been. That was why she could finally make it without fear. Yes, she said. Frederick's breath left him, quiet and unguarded. He did not reach for her until she stepped forward. Their wedding was held before winter in the parish church, modest enough that no one mistook it for a victory over society. The true celebration came at the Michaelmas supper in the restored assembly room. Long tables filled the hall where the purse had once been displayed as proof that dignity could be purchased. Now warm loaves stood beneath plain linen cloths. Mrs. Pritchard arranged bowls near the west table. Matthew sat among the parish families, respected not because a duke had rescued him, but because he had refused to sell what was not his to give. Elinor stood at the final table, hemming a long bread cloth. Her mother's silver thimble covered her finger as she closed the last stitch. Frederick approached from the opposite side and reached to steady the linen. Then he stopped. His hand remained above the cloth, waiting. Elinor looked at him. The pause held every lesson he had learned and every choice she had protected. This time she did more than nod. She placed the edge of the cloth into his hand. Together they spread it across the table. The first loaves were set upon it while conversation rose around them. Elinor removed the thimble and placed it beside the warm bread. Once, it had repaired what scarcity threatened to take from a private household. Now it rested at the center of something shared, while Frederick stood beside her and held only what she had freely chosen to give.